Hi everyone, welcome back. Next we have Thomas Stringer and Lydia Eberly presenting Empowering EFL Learners and Teachers, Harnessing AI for Writing Instruction. Okay, you can begin whenever you're ready. You have 20 minutes to present and 5 minutes for Q&A.
Okay, thank you very much. Hi everyone, welcome to our presentation, Empowering EFL Learners and Teachers, Harnessing AI for Writing Instruction. We're gonna do our best to give an excellent presentation, but if we're a little bit sluggish, it's because it's midnight at the nighttime here in Japan, but we're gonna do our best, okay? So we'll just talk about ourselves a little bit first, go over some of the literature behind our study, talk about the learning context, and then we'll get into the detail of the study and what we did. So just a little bit about me, first of all. My name is Thomas Stringer, and I've been involved in English language teaching in Japan for about 15 years. And I'm currently working at Kwansei Gakuin University in Japan, and I'm also a doctoral student in the UK. Lydia?
Yeah, I've also been teaching in Japan for over 16 years. I'm teaching English at a university here, and I'm also a doctoral student. And for both Tom and I, neither of our research interests prior to this have really been into writing or technology per se. So this is something that's new for both of us. So to go in a bit into our literature review here, as has been discussed throughout this conference so far, there's a lot of potential for AI as a teaching tool. Recent report from the U.S. Department of Education emphasized that it can really free up teacher time by automating repetitive tasks, which increases the amount of time that the teacher is available to students, or allows them time for continuing professional development, reflection, individualized teaching, etc. There's also been a lot of research up to this point in technology-mediated EFL writing. Meta-analyses and syntheses have shown things that it can improve things like collaboration, technology-enhanced writing activities can improve spelling, organization, grammar, awareness of writing processes, and just general accuracy, awareness of correct and incorrect language. And part of our project focused around feedback, especially both including peer feedback as well as AI and technology mediated feedback. Peer assessment can help improve greater self-assessment by heightening awareness of learning goals, performance, gap noticing. When they're talking to their classmates, they can help figure out the gap between where they want to be and where they are now. And technology mediated feedback is particularly useful because it's a bit more timely and it kind of promotes follow-up cycles. You can get more immediate feedback and respond more quickly. Adaptive learning systems in particular are going to offer provision of differentiated, individualized, instantaneous writing feedback. So instead of waiting to get into the classroom, they can get immediate feedback on their writing and fix it right there in the spot. So here in Japan, I think compared to some of the other university teachers we've heard from today, I think that our learners are generally at a lower level of English proficiency. Japan, there's a big emphasis on entrance exams and standardized proficiency tests, which rarely include significant writing components. So in the primary and secondary English education in Japan, there's very little emphasis on writing. High school textbooks will typically include activities involving sentence and paragraph writing, but very little at the essay level. So most university students, even though they are university students, they haven't had any experience writing essays. And if they had, it's very basic 5-paragraph intro, body, conclusion style essays. That's true for our learners as well. Both Tom and I are teaching non-English majors who are fulfilling their mandatory English credit requirements, who have opted into more intensive English programs. So their proficiency is pretty low, but not too terrible. And yeah, so we thought that with all the talk around ChatGPT, it could be a great tool to use. So now Tom's going to talk a bit more about our methodology.
Right. So we kind of went into this with a few different questions in mind. Just initially, as I'm sure many people that were non-experts in using AI until November of last year, we kind of just initially started wanting to play with the technology and see what it can do. And then as we kind of got into the more, we were kind of more enthusiastic with what we could do with the technology, we started investigating it in a more systematic way. So we wanted to look at what are the affordances and limitations of the technology for teaching and for learning second language writing. So the methodology we adopted in our study is the exploratory action research design. So it's a systematic approach, but it can also be flexible for teachers like us to investigate in the classroom, and it can be used for lots of different purposes, but it can be used to promote change in the classroom, or it can be focused on a particular investigatory target. And what characterizes this research methodology is you have this kind of initial exploratory phase, which is what we did. We're just kind of testing it out, what it did in the classroom, and then you kind of see how you go, and then you proceed onto a more kind of strategic or systematic kind of action research phase afterwards. So we collected data across 3 intact classes at 2 universities in Japan this year. And yeah, as Lydia mentioned, we're teaching mostly non-English majors, and the classes are held between 2 and 4 times a week. We had 47 students participating in our study. As you can see, it's heavily weighted towards Japanese students there. And the other kind of key bit of information there, going back to what Lydia said, is their proficiency level information. You can see there is they're generally rather low. Okay, and these were mostly freshmen students that were involved in the study. So we used ChatGPT 3.5 and also a tool called Zengengo, which is a kind of a complement to other learning management systems that you might use for EFL teaching. It's pretty useful for generating assignments, distributing them, giving feedback on all kinds of listening, speaking, reading, and writing activities, and we used that to kind of mediate the study. So as for ChatGPT itself, in the exploratory phase, when it was mostly just me at the beginning, it was really just playing with the technology to see what it could do, because it was new to me. And then as it showed some promise, then we kind of built out the study, got Lydia involved, and then we started getting more systematic with how we were going to use it, using it to generate EFL topics and genres of writing, and also to generate sample texts, then to rewrite those texts, and eventually to generate feature analyses of those texts, and then also writing prompts that would be useful for students to respond to. And then as the study progressed even further, we used it to make revisions to texts which our learners had generated. Okay, so going into a bit more detail about the exploratory phase itself, as I mentioned, it was really just playing and experimenting with what ChatGPT could do. So was it able to kind of meet my expectations of what would be a writing assignment if I asked it to produce a list of typical EFL writing prompts, right? Or could it generate a list of genres of writing? So then I started using it in the classroom just to see how did the students react to these things, and it was surprisingly positive. I would say fairly low expectations of what this technology would be able to do immediately, and when it was surprisingly successful, I thought, okay, let's start to build this out a little bit. So what that looked like when we started getting a bit more systematic about it was asking ChatGPT to generate lists of typical EFL topics like food, hobbies, pride, travel, and to generate lists of writing genres, right, that might be useful for learners of our level to know, and then to initially generate kind of sample reading prompts that were connected to those topic areas, then to regenerate those prompts in the style. So you can see we went from a piece of writing about breakfast to a piece of persuasive writing about food, trying to persuade someone to try a different type of breakfast. Okay, so that's how we did approach that stage. The next step for making this kind of useful teaching tool was to take those stylized texts and to generate kind of feature analyses of them, which would be helpful for us for our instructional purposes, and then also to generate prompts that the learners could responds to in written form, right, after having read the initial text. Okay, so you can see some examples there on the right. For example, about food, persuade someone to try your favorite food or meal and explain why they should do it. Okay. And then the next phase of this was once the learners started getting into the swing of the study, they were generating a lot of textual material. So what we would then do is have ChatGPT analyze these learner-generated texts and make them more target-like, right? To make them contain more features that might be typical of, say, persuasive writing. And then we used these kind of A/B versions of the text to provide kind of a comparison for the students to look at and for us to kind of highlight key features. And as I mentioned before, the other major technology that we used in our classrooms was called Zengingo. So it's just you can imagine a kind of learning management system. So on the left side, you can see how the activity was presented to the learners. So introducing the topic itself. Then there's a reading passage there at the top. And then the writing prompt is written there. And then we've got features like a timer, target words, and a word count that increases as the students type. Right? In the middle box there, you can see the kind of individual student response view that we get, and we could provide feedback directly to a single student if we wanted. And then on the far right side, you can see a kind of grid or gallery view where we could see all the learners in an individual class, and we could use that also for teaching purposes, so the learners could see at the same time lots of their classmates' attempts at responding to the prompt, right, and compare and contrast those. So to get a bit more granular on the class by class kind of level, what we did with any particular genre was that we would introduce that writing genre and talk very, very briefly about what its purpose is. For example, persuasive writing is to change the mind of the audience. And then we would note some kind of major stylistic features of that genre. For example, like persuasive writing, you wouldn't discuss anything that was counter to your point of view, for example, right? Then the learners would read that thematic text that I showed you before and the writing prompt, and for about 5 minutes they'd plan some brief content notes, and then we framed it as a fluency writing activity. They'd just try and write what they could in that short time, and then they did a peer feedback activity. The following class, we kind of dived in a bit more detail into the stylistic features of that genre itself. So we used those A/B comparisons that we'd generated earlier. So we took the learner texts and then had ChatGPT generate a more target-like version of them. And then we tried to highlight the differences. So what the learners would do is they'd sit there, discuss with their neighbor, for example, compare and contrast the two texts, and then we would lead that kind of classroom discussion. And then they were given more time to rewrite their own work so that it was more target-like, and then resubmit that second draft. Okay, so this is kind of the process writing form of it. And then in the third class, we'd share that kind of grid view with all of the second learner submissions, and we could kind of circulate and monitor and kind of try to get them to, or elicit from them, those particular kind of stylistic features that we'd picked up in the earlier classes. And then the learners would have an opportunity to read many different submissions by their classmates and also get feedback by their original partner who had seen the initial writing and then the second draft as well. Right? So it was that was how we kind of integrated all of these different types of human and computer feedback, right, going on in there. And then at the very end of the semester, what we did was we took the all of the second drafts of the learners' work that we had, and we asked the students which one they would like to have us look in more detail at. So after the students had selected their passage that they were most proud of and they wanted the work on the most, we put it into ChatGPT with the following prompt that you can see on the left side. So revise the text to make it more stylistically accurate and fix grammatical or phrasing errors. make it more concise while retaining, the flavor of the text without losing any content, and then make a list of all of these changes there. So then you can see on the right side of the screen, a kind of example of what the students would see. They'd see their own work on the left side, and then on the right side, you could see our kind of initial comments, the redrafted version, and then a list of the changes that were made there. Okay. So our kind of initial perspectives on how this went, the exploratory phase of the study, the students, as I mentioned, responded far more positively than I imagined. When I spoke to them about how they felt about kind of interacting with the activity, they told me that they'd not done much of this kind of writing as a process before, or they didn't have much experience with fluency writing before, where they were just given a prompt and told to write without too much time for planning, or even just the persuasive writing style at all. I think they'd just done basic opinion writing before that. So that definitely made me feel that it was worth pursuing more systematically, which is what we eventually did to kind of broaden it out and kind of deepen how it was integrated with other class activities. So then in the more systematic action research phase, as for our first research question about was it a useful tool that kind of made it better for writing instruction, it definitely made the process writing easier, I felt, to do. On the other hand, that US Department of Education report kind of claiming that it was going to alleviate all of these burdens from teachers and make our job not time consuming at all, that didn't come to pass. It was with the increased capability to do more, it just seemed to generate more work for us. So, that was the reality of it. As for the learning writing, definitely I saw firsthand the importance of the peer feedback stages, because the students were able to generate relatable feedback to one another, especially on the content. However, I felt that some of the target features that we were picking out or trying to pick out were not always salient to the students. So I think it probably required more kind of mechanical or traditional kind of focused practice on those to make it truly effective in the way that we did this study. Lydia?
Yeah, similar to Tom, I thought that it was really useful for generating these little sample essays. You could pick a theme from column A and a style from column B and combine them whichever way you want. And I also thought it was really interesting as an opportunity to discuss the strengths and weaknesses of using AI tools with the students, especially on the occasions when ChatGPT made a mistake. And I could point it out to the students and be like, look, this is a tool. It's not going to replace your human brain. But yeah, some of the limitations I found, especially the vocabulary that was favored by ChatGPT, was really low frequency and not something that I expected my students to know. So it involves either a lot of tweaking of the prompt to get the exact right output from ChatGPT, or a lot of editing on the teacher's part. As for the students, I thought that they were really excited and interested in spotting the differences between the student essays and the AI rewritten versions of those essays, and be like, oh, it changed this, and oh, I didn't know that was a way you could say that. That was really exciting to see. Limitations, I've got a really wide range of proficiencies in my class, and while my most proficient learners were able to kind of pick things out of the essay and then try to incorporate in their own writing in order to match the genre, my least proficient learners were still struggling to generate ideas and produce longer text, and often resorted to just copying phrases wholesale from the models, and really struggled with that. As for the students themselves, from their survey data, we coded it, and overwhelmingly the comments were positive. They said things such as, it's difficult to express a specific theme in English, but it was a very meaningful experience. I was able to compare 2 example sentences, 2 descriptions, so that comparison aspect was important, and what to write through the feedback from the classmates. So the combination of the AI as well as the peer feedback seemed to be beneficial to them. But they also mentioned that they enjoyed getting to experience various different styles and were able to pick up new vocabulary and expressions from it as well. Some of the difficulty they had involved around the time limits we imposed on the initial writing, especially the time limit combined with writing in accordance to the theme, and also just not being used to typing either on a keyboard or on the smartphone. A lot of their writing to this point was by hand. So some things we'd like to do in the future. We've collected this text data from the students, so it'd be fun to do a little bit of text analysis, either to look at for changes in complexity and accuracy between their first and second drafts, or maybe some concordance analyses to see which kinds of phrases they're borrowing from the model essays. And maybe some kind of experimental, quasi-experimental studies comparing classes that are having this AI-enhanced writing process versus classes that are using more conventional writing teaching. And so I think that both Tom and I are going to continue to experience with ChatGPT and large language model text in the classroom. Perhaps the next step might be to have students kind of manipulate the prompts and interact with the AI on their own and see what they can come up with.
Okay.
All right, so there's our references. I think we got a few minutes for Q&A.
Yeah.
So we have a question from Daniel. It says, I want to know more about your transition from traditional process writing to include generative AI in EFL classroom. How did you face the mistrust your teachers and students encounter when using AI-powered writing assistants?
I think in my case, actually, rather than mistrust, there was overtrust. At least among my students, are like, it's a computer. It knows everything. Let's rely on it. So I found this more as an opportunity to introduce the fallibility of AI.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I think the tendency would be for them to uncritically accept what is given to them. So it actually is kind of upon us to, as Lydia mentioned, show them its fallibility and actually show them, no, this is just a tool to assist what you're doing when you're learning writing as a process, but you really still do have to put in the work yourself. And you can, I think an effective way to do that is just to demonstrate to them its weaknesses and its shortcomings on its own. And then also it's also going to be upon us as teachers to, even though we're still learning the potential of the technology ourselves, is to show responsible ways to use it. And we're kind of hopeful that this is one responsible way that we can use it to support them in their learning without them just uncritically thinking that they can use it to churn out writing on their own that they didn't actually have anything to do with, right?
Okay, thank you. The next question is about writing styles. So Daniel asks, in the plenary today, Dr. Sharples mentioned that automated writing evaluation is more biased toward language learners. Do you think that generative AI could compromise the writing style of students?
Yeah, my understanding from Dr. Sharples' lecture was that it was programs meant to detect AI-generated writing were more likely to find a false positive if the writing came from a learner, because the learner writing was more generic, less unique, more like something that could be automatically generated. I feel like using AI to teach students is not a problem as long as you're still encouraging that individuality and that uniqueness of style.
I think
get the voice.
Yeah, I think going back to something that Lydia mentioned earlier would be the tendency of ChatGPT that we discovered to generate overly florid prose. And if our learners were to try, and we haven't tested this yet, but we've got the data set, that's where we're going to take this from now. But if they were trying to emulate that might be something that kind of negatively affected their writing, I think, especially if they're not ready to generate that kind of and very few are yet, if they ever get there. So yeah, I think again that shows the importance of the human element, at least for the moment, us as teachers going in there and exercising a bit of editorial control over what's going into the teaching materials. So again, that goes back to our point about whether this is a useful instructional tool or a time-saving instructional tool. The answer is it's going to be useful, but certainly not that time-saving in our experience. But yeah, thank you for the question.
Okay, we have one more question from chat. What about tools like Grammarly? How different is AI from it?
My understanding is that Grammarly will check a text that's already been written, but AI can pull a text out of thin air.
I think that's right. Yeah, it's that's a good summary.
Thank you. Any questions from in-person attendees? Sir?
So thank you so much for this, and I really appreciate the work you did to figure out how to implement it in a classroom. And I'm just wondering about you mentioned that your students are adapting rather swiftly to just taking ChatGPT at its face value and not being critical about it. But the question that Daniel Murcia posted also asked about resistance from the teachers. So you tried to implement this in 3 different classrooms. So you had 3 instructors, and I just want to know, like, if their background lent them toward adopting the implementation of the tool in their classrooms, because I feel like a lot of teachers are hesitant to just take the brave step and try and unleash the Kraken in the classroom. So were these native English speakers at these Japanese universities? Were they Japanese instructors? They were yourself. Okay, so just maybe you could talk about what it's like as the teacher to bring this into the classroom.
Lydia, do you want to take that?
New to play around with, especially since Tom kindly did a lot of the preparation for me to begin with. But yeah, I think we're definitely still the minority among our colleagues. Like, no one else in my department has done this at all, and I'm guessing not at yours either, Tom?
No, that's true. So yeah, we were the teachers that were doing this, so it was really just on ourselves, and we both, I think I can speak for Lydia as well, have a fair amount of autonomy with what we choose to do or how we choose to approach our classes in the classroom. So it was really just a question of us, having the bravery to take that step, and it really did go back to me in that early exploratory phase that I mentioned at the start. Just actually, everyone had heard about this technology a lot around that time, but I thought, okay, I better actually try and use it, right? I'd better just test it out a lot, see what it can do at home, and then, dip my toe in the water of introducing it in class and seeing what it did in a controlled manner, and then also building that out more slowly in a systematic way. And actually something that helped a lot was having a co-researcher teacher like Lydia, because it helps to have kind of moral support, but also you can bounce ideas off one another, make sure you're on the right path. So I would say, in terms of advice, was be systematic, be strategic about what you do, possibly build some support systems if you're going to be doing this. And yeah, that's what I'd say to encourage people that are considering developing this technology. But of course, be aware of what your departmental culture is as well, and if it's going to be supportive of that kind of thing. And we were just very fortunate that we were. But yeah, thanks for the question.
Okay, thank you so much for your presentation and for your answers. So we have our next presentation in 1 minute. So thank you so much to Thomas and Lydia. That was a really interesting talk. Thank you so much.